There's a lot to love in Bioshock Infinite. Its setting is gorgeous with its city and sky and vibrant colors, and the story makes it incredibly interesting throughout, filled with twists and ideas. However, Bioshock Infinite's greatest strength is use of its primary character, Elizabeth. The game does everything it can to make the player like the character, not only through its story, but especially through its gameplay. The player's view of Elizabeth is meant to parallel that of the player character, Booker DeWitt's. Upon beginning the game, the only thing DeWitt, and by extension the player, hear about her are
Bring us the curve and wipe away the debt!
Elizabeth begins pretty humanized. DeWitt only sees her as a means to an end, launching her and taking her shady people in her serve his own ends. To the player, she is merely an objective marker that must be reached to continue the game. However, this quickly changes. Curiosity about her is created by her mysterious powers to bend space. When the player helps her escape the tower, Elizabeth starts to be a likable character and also shows her usefulness. During combat, she'll throw the player health packs, figures, and ammo when the player is low on these things, creating a sense of her saving you just in time. The player can also have her use her powers to help, such as spying turrets. Booker the character depends on Elizabeth narratively, but the player also depends on Elizabeth through the mechanics. Elizabeth is always running ahead of the player, not only keeping her eagerness, but also constantly keeping her in frame, reminding the player of her presence. Her pathing also acts as a small guide directing the player where to go, as she will prefer the path that takes the player to their objective. The game is also filled with locked doors, which the player needs to call Elizabeth over to unlock. This reminds the player of her presence and causes the player to value her, while also providing a reward for exploration in the form of lockpicks. The game is also careful to ensure she doesn't feel like a burden. Her running ahead with the player ensures that they never have to wait on her, unlike many annoying escort missions in other games. She's also invincible, so the player never has to worry about her during combat. During the game, the player is shown to choose necklaces for Elizabeth to wear, either a cage or a bird, with her wearing whichever the player picks for the rest of the game. While a small detail, it causes the player to become invested in Elizabeth and provides a sense of ownership of at least some part of her person. As the player continues to play the game, they see Elizabeth less as a character in an escort mission, but more as a likable person in her own right. When she runs away, the player doesn't just chase after her merely because they need her for the game to progress, they actively want to see more of her. This reaction from the player parallels DeWitt's transformation, starting to want to care more about getting Elizabeth to Paris than wiping away the debt. This all culminates in Elizabeth being kidnapped by the antagonist of the game, Zachary Comstock. DeWitt the character is sad, but the player is also saddened by the events since they have spent most of the game becoming invested in this person. The narrative creates negative emotions of missing Elizabeth, but the mechanics self-emphasize these emotions as well. The game becomes noticeably more difficult as the player no longer has any of Elizabeth's powers or task items to rely on. New enemies appear called the Blizzard Silence, which summon bullet sponge enemies that eat away at the player's ammo supply. This is especially important since ammo is now far more precious, as the player no longer has Elizabeth to supply them when they run low. Ammo sources are especially scarce in this level, and there are no vending machines selling ammo. These cause the part of the game without Elizabeth to seem more difficult, and makes the player wish she were there to toss them ammo when they run low. This creates large amounts of contrast from when she does return and can once again provide these services. The Blizzard Silence also emphasizes stealth, since they have visible view cones and sneaking past them is far more efficient than dumping bullets and taking damage. The stealth communicates a feeling of disempowerment and weakness. This atmosphere of disempowerment is emphasized even more heavily in the horror environment itself. The rooms are dark, and hospitals are a common trope in horror. The projectors are eerily silent, further communicating uneasiness and emphasizing how much weaker the player is without Elizabeth. The sense of disempowerment is established firmly by the horror mechanics, to be later contrasted against the normal Columbia environments when Elizabeth returns. The feelings of disempowerment and uneasiness in the absence of Elizabeth is continued shortly before the player rescues her. The new armor guards are one of the toughest enemies in the game, further increasing the contrast between this level and how much easier the game gets once Elizabeth is rescued. When Elizabeth is rescued, the game returns to its normal level of difficulty, and she once again helps the player even more with the addition of being able to control Songbird during the final level. Narrative, with its many cutscenes, is frequently kept in a separate box than gameplay, with the two being viewed as wholly distinct and often looked at in isolation. This is a shame, as Bioshock Infinite shows how incredible a game can be when it uses its mechanics alongside this narrative to form a more cohesive and superior whole.